Week 12 of the fantasy football season. He has wide receiver start sits every matchup this week. Thursday night, Pittsburgh Steelers at the Cleveland Browns. George Pickens, he's a start each and every week for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. Ever since Russell Wilson's been in the starting lineup, he's putting up numbers and putting up points for fantasy owners. So with their great rapport and Pickens putting up elite numbers the last 3-4 weeks, he's a start versus a weak Brown defense this season. Mike Williams is sit. I know he was the hero a couple weeks ago at the Commanders, but last week he had the goose egg. He still has to pick up the playbook. He's still not 100% healthy, I believe, as well. Mike Williams coming off the torn ACL. So this week, even in a good matchup, he's a sit. Jerry Jeudy a start. Last week a big game for Jerry Jeudy, and he's fitting well this season with this Cleveland Brown team after getting traded to Cleveland in the offseason, signing a nice contract extension. So Jerry Jeudy this week in a ball game, they're going to be trailing early and often and have to play catch-up in this one is the Cleveland Browns. He's definitely a start. Cedric Tillman, a flex option. Cedric Tillman, last week it wasn't a good game for him. Only 7.70 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But he's a wide receiver that's been putting up points with Jameis Winston in their quarterback. So this week, I still think he could go out there and produce. He's a flex option. Elijah Moore, Sid, I know he's been decent over the last 4 weeks. Elijah Moore, 3 of those games, double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. But it's tough to trust all 3 of these guys. Not in a great matchup versus a good defense. I think Elijah Moore don't do much in this ball game, and he's a sit for me in this one. Tennessee Titans at the Houston Texans. Calvin Ridley a start the last month of the season. He's really picked it up, and he's putting points on the board, and he's been productive. And besides Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, the only 2 players, in my opinion, with fantasy value for this Titan team. So a game where they're most likely going to be chasing points and have to throw nonstop. Ridley's a start. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games for him, but he's not doing much else. If he's not getting the touchdowns, his fantasy points have been pretty much irrelevant. And I know last week he had a 98-yard touchdown versus the Minnesota Vikings, but this week in a matchup versus a pretty good defense of the Houston Texans, he's a sit. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, they're locked in his starts each and every week. This is a nice number 1-2 combo receiving core now with Stephon Diggs out for the season. And we saw last year before Tank Dell went out with injury, both these players were putting up points, having nice fantasy days for fantasy owners. So this week, again, they're both starts. In this one, Minnesota Vikings at the Bears. Justin Jefferson locked in weekly as a start. I know the last couple weeks he hasn't been putting up elite numbers, but in a division matchup at the Bears, a team where he's got a pretty good track record against, I think he goes out there and has one of his better games in the last month. Jordan Addison is sit. I know he's banged up as well as Jordan Addison. Last week he did find the end zone, but once every 3-4 weeks he's going to put up fantasy points. He's been inconsistent. This offense runs through Jefferson, Aaron Jones, and TJ Hawkinson, with Addison pretty much being the 4th, 5th option in this offense for this Minnesota Viking team. So he's a sit. DJ Moore, start for me in this game. Last week, one of his better games in the last month, 6 catches, 56 yards in the tough loss versus the Green Bay Packers. So DJ Moore, we know he's a good route runner. We know he's got yard after catch ability and good speed. But the thing, him and Caleb Williams just haven't been on the same page a lot for this Chicago Bear team. But this week in a matchup versus Minnesota where they possibly could be chasing points, I think Moore could go out there and be decent again. Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, both sits. They pretty much haven't done much all season long. In this part of the season, I know 6 teams are on bye week here, but I just don't see Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen going out there and putting up a big game. And if they do, it's another thing where these players took weeks to put up fantasy points, and the problem's been the offensive line not protecting well for Caleb Williams. And also Williams holds on to the football a lot, and he's indecisive at times. So their sits. Dallas Cowboys at the Commanders. CeeDee Lamb, the only Cowboy receiver really has fantasy value, will be on most rosters. I know Tolbert showed some flashes on and off this season, but CeeDee Lamb's pretty much the only option. Cooper Rush in the lineup, so he's a start each and every week, even if the numbers obviously going to go down in tougher matchups. And also with Dak Prescott out for the season, I still think CeeDee Lamb could go out there, have a couple good games. And this week in a ball game, most likely chasing points, we could see a lot of garbage time and targets his way. Terry McLaurin is start. Last week, a tough game for him, 2 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But anyone versus that Eagles secondary has had trouble top receivers all season long. So McLaurin this week versus a defense that can't stop anyone's a start. Noah Brown is it. I know he's versing one of his former teams in the Dallas Cowboys is Noah Brown. But besides that Hail Mary touchdown, which obviously was a little fluky then that ball game weeks ago versus Bears, he's not going to do much. He's Noah Brown, and he's a sit for me this week. New England Patriots at the Dolphins. Demario Douglas, he's a flex option this week here. Douglas, the leading receiver easily on this roster, with guys like Kendrick Bourne, Bote, Jalen Polk not doing much. They're not even viable fantasy options, so they're not listed. So Douglas, he's a good slot guy. He's a guy that can run yards after catch and make plays. And with Drake May in their quarterback, his numbers definitely improved. But this week, even in a decent matchup at the Dolphins, he's a flex option. Tyreek Hill, he's a start. Last couple weeks now, he's found the end zone for this Miami Dolphin team. It's not the elite numbers we're seeing from Tyreek Hill, but him and Tua have the ESP. They're making plays. And this week, it's a pretty good matchup versus middle of the pack to weak secondary of the Patriots. He's a start. Jalen Waddle is it. It's just been a down year once again for Waddle. And he don't even reach double-digit fantasy points anymore. You're getting 5-7 fantasy points weekly from Waddle. So right now, he's not producing. He's not putting up fantasy points. And he's definitely a wide receiver I don't have confidence in, even in a decent matchup as it. Kansas City Chiefs at the Panthers. Hopkins, the last couple weeks, his numbers have gone down after that big ball game on Monday Night Football a few weeks ago versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where he found the end zone twice. But this week, a slam dunk matchup versus one of the worst defenses in the league. So I think Hopkins goes out there and he's a start. Xavier Worthy, he's a flex option. Worthy last week, he had a big game in the first half, and then second half, we didn't see much at all out of Xavier Worthy. So they got to find easy ways to get him the ball, because if you could get the ball to Worthy in space, he's one of the quickest wide receivers in all pro football already. So this week, I think once again he could go out there and have a decent game. I'm not saying he's going to put up the numbers like he did last week, but versus Carolina defense that can't stop anyone, he's a flex. Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker are sits. This is a tough matchup for this Panther offense. I know it's going to be a game they're going to be trailing early and often and have to throw a whole lot and chase points. But both these wide receivers, they're young guys, obviously. They're inconsistent. And this week, I just don't see them doing much in this game. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Giants. Mike Evans, he's a start in this ball game. He's coming off the hamstring injury. And him and Baker, they've been locked in since last season, putting up numbers and putting up points. So this week in a great matchup at a weak secondary, he's a must-start. Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard is sits. McMillan's been banged up over the last couple weeks, but I expect he's going to come back coming off the bye week and refresh for this Buck team. But this offense pretty much is going to revolve around the running backs, obviously. And Rashad White, Bucky Irvin, Mike Evans, and K. Dotton as the top four targets. So Shepard and McMillan, I just don't see him even in a good matchup doing much in this game. So there sits Malik Neighbors as a start. We know Tommy DeVito's in there quarterback now for this New York Giant team. And maybe Malik Neighbors, they needed to change a quarterback, because we know Jones, he's taken a lot of sacks this season. Is Daniel Jones for this Giant team, and he looks to run a little too much as well. With Tommy DeVito, we saw him last season have some decent games, and he stays in the pocket and tries to spread the football down the field. So Malik Neighbors, maybe it could be back to putting up elite numbers in a game where the secondary isn't good at Tampa Bay, where they could make some plays as New York. Wan'Dale Robinson, a sit. I know he had a couple decent games this season, a good underneath route runner, good hands, and yard after catch player. But this week at Tampa Bay, even in a good matchup, it's tough to trust, because I believe Malik Neighbors is going to get peppered with the targets, but not much else going on in the passing game. Detroit Lions at the Indianapolis Colts. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams are both start. He's putting up top 5 numbers at the receiver position. And Jameson Williams, I know he's been a boom or bust type of wideout at times, where he's been a deep all or nothing, but we know Jameson Williams, it just takes him to get in a little bit of space, and if he's got that running room, he's going to find the end zone like he did last week on a 64-yard slant route touchdown. So this week in a good matchup, fast track at a bad secondary, he's a start. Josh Downs, he's a start. I know the other receivers have been putting up some decent numbers of late, but with Anthony Richardson in there quarterback, it's tough to trust many of these wide receivers on this Colt team. I know last week he put up 272 passing at the New York Jets, but this week a tough matchup versus a good Lion defense. So Josh Downs, he'll get his numbers. He puts up points, obviously his downs, but Pittman, Pierce, and Adonai Mitchell have all been inconsistent all season long. So this week, those 3 receivers are sits and Downs is a start. Denver Broncos at the Raiders. Courtland Sutton, the last month of the season, either 100-yard games or he's found the end zone in the last 4 games. So this week it's a good matchup. He's an easy start. Him and Bo Nix are locked in, and he's been a target monster of late as well. Has been Courtland Sutton. Devon Vele, last couple weeks, he's definitely getting it going. He's emerging as the number 2 target in this passing game. He's definitely someone to own in 12-team leagues or deeper, but right now I'm still not 100% sold to put him in the starting lineup or even be a flex option, but someone to be owned is Vele. And like I said, 6'7", 6'8", definitely a big target in this offense that's starting to expand with Bo Nix at quarterback. But this week he's a sit. Jacoby Myers a sit. He's going to have Patrick Surtain on him, obviously, in this ball game, where he's one of the best, if not the best corners in the league. I believe he is his Surtain, and a lot of wide receivers really haven't done much all season long. So this passing game has McNoodle all year. And this week, I think Myers is going to be bottled up, so he's a sit. Arizona Cardinals at the Seahawks, Marvin Harrison, he's a start in this ball game. I know it's been an up and down rookie season. He was drafted second, third round in most fantasy drafts. He is Marvin Harrison. But this week, it's a pretty good matchup at the Seattle Seahawks, where I don't think their secondary is all that great. And now after the bye week, a lot of rookies, they get into the playbook a little bit more, and they get more involved, even though obviously Marvin Harrison, he was a starting wide receiver from week one and playing the majority of the snaps. Seahawks, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba both starts. DK Metcalf returned to the lineup last week, and one play he just missed going to the house. If he didn't step out of bounds, he had a lot of daylight, and it could have been a 50-plus yard touchdown in that one. But Metcalf, we know he's a physical wide receiver. Not many corners could cover him, and obviously they don't have the physicality of Metcalf. So this week in a matchup versus a beatable secondary, I think he goes out there and has a good game. Jackson Smith-Njigba, the last couple games for him have been monster performances. Going back to week 9, he had 7 for 180 and 2 touchdowns versus the Rams. And then last week, he cracked over 100 yards on 10 catches. So Jackson Smith-Njigba, Geno Smith, they got a real good rapport going. And he's a good yard after catch and possession wide receiver the last few weeks. So they both start. Tyler Lockett is sit. It looks like he's getting phased out, and rightfully so. He's the veteran in this receiving room, and that when you got guys like Metcalf and JSN, it's tough to get a lot of targets and get the separation compared to those guys. So this week, Lockett's a sit. San Francisco 49ers at the Packers. Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings is starts. I know Samuel, his numbers haven't been elite this season, where he was going third, fourth round in most fantasy drafts. But Deebo, it just takes one big play for him, obviously, to have his fantasy day, and they use him in different types of ways in the formation is San Francisco. So this week versus a leaky secondary of the Packers, he's a start. Jawan Jennings, we've seen some good games out of him this season, and last week he had a big ball game with 23 fantasy points. So Jawan Jennings, he could catch the football. He's a good route runner, and him and Brock Purdy definitely have a good rapport going back to a few years ago where they were the second team in training camp and all preseason. So the rapport is there, and we're seeing it on the field. And to be honest, Jennings has had a better season than Brandon Ayuk in the same amount of games, just about. Ricky Pearsall was sit last week. He had a goose egg. 2 weeks ago, he did find the end zone, had 70 yards in that game versus the Bucs up here. So he's going to be up and down, I believe, and rightfully so. He missed majority of the season with the injury. And now Jawan Jennings has definitely emerged as a number 2 option in the passing game. So Pearsall this week is a sit. Green Bay Packers, Jaden Reed is a start, one of the best yard after catch receivers in the league. And he's just a wide receiver that has a knack for the end zone. So him and Jordan Love have a good rapport. They're making plays all season long, so he's a start. Christian Watson, big deep ball threat. We know a couple years ago he broke out in the second half. And Watson last week had a monster game with a 60 or 50 yard catch and 150 yards receiving in that one. So if he could get vertical and be that nice deep ball threat for this offense, this is really going to be another element added. And Watson can find his way breaking out once again like he did a couple years ago. Romeo Doubs, Latavian Wicks sits for me in this game. I know both these receivers have had some games this season, but this offense, it's tough to forecast besides Jaden Reed week in and week out who's going to put up numbers and who's going to be consistent for fantasy owners. So this week in a matchup versus a good defense, even though they've blown some games late this season in the fourth quarter, both these wide receivers are sits for me in this one. Sunday night, Philadelphia Eagles at the Rams. It should be a high-scoring game between these two teams. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith starts. A.J. Brown, since he returned to the lineup a few weeks ago, he's putting up numbers. Him and Jalen Hurts, they're locked in as one of the best quarterback wide receiver combos in all pro football, so he's a must start in a good matchup. Devonta Smith, I know it's definitely been a down season, and he's a boom or bust wide receiver regardless, we know that, but for the most part, he's been busting out and not putting up numbers over the last couple weeks. But Devonta Smith, it just takes one big play or two for him to put up fantasy numbers. So this week, fast track, Sunday Night Football, I think he's going to go out there, Smith, and have one of his better games of the season. So I have him in the starting lineup this week. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. I know it's a tougher matchup versus one of the better secondaries in the league, and Philadelphia is definitely shut down 8 receivers this season. But Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, like I said, they put up numbers week in and week out. And this week, in this matchup versus the Eagles, you got to put them in the starting lineup because you drafted these guys first, second round in most fantasy leagues. And you just got to count on them, even in the tougher matchup, in the final matchup of the week, Monday night, the Harbaugh Bowl, Baltimore Ravens at the Chargers. Zay Flowers is a start. I know last week was a down week, but still found the end zone on that last drive, and they couldn't get the 2-point conversion to tie it and send it to overtime. So Flowers, number 1 option in the passing game easily. He's going out there, he's making plays, he could run the routes, he could burn a secondary. And this week at the Chargers, what we saw last week where they versed Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both have monster games, it wouldn't be surprising to me if Flowers has a monster game. Rashard Bateman, Deontay Johnson assists. They're just not getting enough volume or enough targets in this offense, obviously, right now for this Baltimore Raven team. We're pretty much they're 4th and 5th in the pecking order behind Lamar's running ability. Derrick Henry, Flowers, and even Mark Andrews the last month of the season has played better. So they're both sits. Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson, both flex options. Ladd McConkey's definitely been improving over the last few weeks, no doubt about it, for this Los Angeles Charger team. He's more in the playbook in his rookie season. But right now, I believe these guys are going to be flex options. Baltimore, their defense for the most part has been okay at times. And after coming off a bad loss, this defense, they're going to want to clamp down and zero in some of these players. So McConkey and Quentin Johnson, they're solid number 3 options in your lineup, but definitely not top 24 options. I have them as flexes this week. So that's wide receiver, start, sit every matchup for week 12 of the fantasy football season.